Hello and welcome to the EUROPAST Podcast series. We are here at Vilnius University talking with Dr. Jonathan Brent, the CEO and Executive Director of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York. Welcome. Dr. Jonathan Brent, thank you for agreeing to meet to talk about public history. You came to Vilnius to speak at a conference with a fascinating topic, Ideologies of Hate and Hope in Modern Jewish History. We will go to this specifically, but let's start with a few words about you. Could you say a few words about yourself, what motivates you, and how you came to become the director of YIVO?
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me onto this podcast. I will try to cut to the chase, not spend a lot of time with biography, but I spent about 20 years working in the Soviet archives in Moscow. There I understood the power of archives, and I also understood the need to reveal what was previously secret in these archives. The work that I and my team did in Moscow, it changed the historiography of the Cold War in the United States. When I came to YIVO, and that was partially what brought me to YIVO, because YIVO has this tremendous archive as well. And I realized that there is much in that archive that needs to be brought to light. And much that was also connected to my interest in Russian history and the history of Eastern Europe generally.
When were you working in Moscow, in the archives?
From 1992 to 2009.
That's when the archives opened up.
And I left at the time when Putin was shutting down the archives, and it was no longer possible really to do the kind of exploring that I and my team had been doing up to then. But that was a significant factor in my decision to come to YIVO. I had been at Yale University Press for about 20 years also as editorial director, and published over 30 books on Soviet history and Eastern European history. I published, for instance, Timothy Snyder's first book on Poland, and so forth. And so I was deeply enmeshed in the history of Eastern Europe, partly because my family came from this region. My grandfather was born in Vilna, then moved to Lviv. Other parts of my family were from Zhytomyr and Chernigov. And so I felt something deep about this history, and it enraged me as a child, as an adult, as a student, as growing up, and then after college, that I could not learn anything about this whole world. It seemed closed. There were few books for me to read that got me into, I could read Tolstoy, I could read Dostoevsky, I could read Venedikt Yerofeyev, I could read literature, but there was very little that gave me a feeling of daily life of this world.
Don't mean to interrupt you, but I was also thinking, isn't that the time when Fortunov collection kind of the interviews for the Fortunov collections were collected?
They started at almost the same time, yes.
Were you involved in that somehow?
I was only marginally involved because I knew the founder of Fortunoff. And at Yale, I had some experience publishing material from the Holocaust. So I was sort of in the background, and from time to time they might ask my opinion about something, but I wasn't involved whatsoever in the creation of the Fortunoff. But in any case, the fascination with this history and the feeling that I had growing up that there was always something that wasn't being told to me. It wasn't necessarily bad, it was just not there. And so that's what drew me to YIVO, ultimately. A desire to find out and also to reveal. Because I knew that for the majority of American Jews, and I identified with that majority for the most part of more or less assimilated American Jews, they knew nothing about where they came from. It's very difficult for a non-Jew to understand what this means. An Irishman, an Italian, an Englishman, a Frenchman, a Lithuanian living in America can always go back to Ireland or England or France or Lithuania and visit the sites of his or her childhood or their grandparents' childhood, can visit sites of historical importance. But for a Jew living in America whose grandparents had been from Ukraine or from Lithuania, there really is nowhere to go back to. There are no sites. And so we are a people with a tremendous history, but with a 3,000-year history. But the last 100 years or so are kind of a blank. And to live without history is like Peter Pan living without his shadow.
What an incredible story. Tell our listeners more about the history of YIVO and its connection to Lithuania and Europe.
Well, YIVO's connection to Lithuania is very powerful. It was conceived in 1925 and in Berlin, actually. And there were 3 sites. One in Berlin, one in Warsaw, and one in Vilnius. And each of the different sites of YIVO had a different function to study different aspects of Jewish history, economics, political science. But in Vilnius, it was to study the language, the Yiddish language. And this gave it a very special place. And Yiddish language and Yiddish folklore, Jewish folklore. And so Max Weinreich, who was the director of YIVO at its founding here in Vilnius, began a collection campaign, and he conceived the idea of collecting material about Eastern European and Russian Jewish life from the whole world. Wherever Jews from Eastern Europe and Russia may have gone, he wanted their recollections, he wanted their letters, he wanted their poems, he wanted everything, to learn everything about them. And so materials started flooding into Vilnius from all over the world. Let me give you one example. My family was from Chicago, Illinois. I grew up hearing my father talking about a performance of a play called Kuni Lemmel in the Douglas Park Jewish Theater. And he used to go to it as a boy. You can imagine my unbelievable surprise when I'm working in the archives here in Vilnius, and the chief archivist pulls just at random a poster out of the box, and it is a poster of the performance of Kuni Lemmel in the Douglas Park Jewish Theater in 1934. And what does that mean? It means there was somebody in Chicago at that time who knew about YIVO, who said, this is important, and sent it to Vilnius. And that's what Max Weinreich did, you see. That's why what he did was so important. He made people in Chicago, in Buenos Aires, in Petersburg, think that their history was important. Important enough that they should take a poster off a wall and send it all the way to an unknown place. And he filled, therefore, the Jewish people of the diaspora with a certain kind of pride that they lacked. They did not have this. that their history, their language, their folklore, their theater, their music all meant something. It wasn't just second rate. It was of equal status to that of any other culture. And so YIVO filled a great role.
And it's very much a transnational project.
Very much.
Exactly as you described. Our podcast series is on the topic of public history, how the past is communicated and how the public can and perhaps should be engaged in a dialogue about the past.
Yes.
Could you say a few words about the role and place of YIVO in the American ecosystem of museums, archives, research, and educational institutions? What kind of reach-out activities do you carry on and so on?
We do a great deal of public outreach, of public education. We have a variety of educational programs, some of which are language programs teaching Yiddish, but we go beyond the teaching of Yiddish to the teaching of Yiddishkeit, Yiddish culture. And we are about to, I hope, formulate officially an agreement with Bard College in New York State to develop a master's degree program on Yiddish civilization. It will be the first such program in the world that has in-depth courses on language, on culture, on music, on history, on political science, as well as on the histories of the nations in which Jewish history developed. And we also have exhibitions, we have lectures. We don't do podcasts, but we do—
Not yet.
Not yet. And so I'm learning something just by virtue of being here. But we do have a YouTube channel, and we get thousands of people watching our programs on YouTube. Some programs have been watched by 50,000 people around the world. We do many Zoom programs. We have a winter program, a winter educational program, a summer program, and fall classes as well.
Actually, my students here at the Institute, they were assigned to watch Christopher Diekman's lecture.
Oh, yes.
Which he gave at YIVO. And so, this is part of the curricula.
Yes, that was about 4 years ago, I
That's
think.
right, but they still have to watch that, so we're kind of indirectly connected.
Yes, yes.
Now let's turn to your visit to Vilnius and the conference on the ideologies of hate and hope in modern Jewish history. This was a high-level event held at the parliament. The speaker of the parliament was there, said, an opening speech. How do you explain the purpose of this event?
Okay.
What message did you want to convey?
The purpose of this event. I gave a talk in Chicago, Illinois, some 8 or 9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, about YIVO. And at the end of that talk, and it was at the Lithuanian community in Chicago, at the end of that talk, a man stood up and he said to me, "Mr. Brent, thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate what you're doing, but why should I care about you and what you are doing when your people let the Soviets into Lithuania in 1940? So I was not
What
prepared.
did you answer?
I was not prepared to answer that question. I really wasn't. I wasn't prepared on many other occasions to answer the question about wasn't the Communist Party really Jewish?
Also, why is it your people?
Yeah, why is it your people? Exactly. I wasn't prepared for that. But I began to realize that this was a burning issue. It was not an old issue, a dead issue. And then, of course, it became evident to me that it was not just a Lithuanian issue. It was a Polish issue. It was a German issue. And what was most disturbing to me is that it is now an American issue. And I did research of my own in this, and I discovered that not only was it an American issue, but this was something that got developed in America And it was a global issue. And therefore, knowing that this was really at the bottom also of the accusations that Hitler made against the Jews, and that was at the bottom of the genocide of the Jews in Lithuania, that they were communist Bolsheviks. You kill a Bolshevik, you kill a Jew, you kill a Jew, you kill a Bolshevik. Very simple. It seemed to me that it was high time that some former Soviet country, one with a very complicated history with their Jewish past, should confront this directly. And the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the liquidation of the Vilna Ghetto seemed to me a good opportunity to raise this at a high level. And so I approached Faina Kukliansky with this idea. And at the same time, I said, I will only do this if it is in the Seimas and if it gets the support of the speaker of the Seimas, because that means something. It means that this is going to be open and it is going to be supported by the government. And as far as I know, Lithuania now is the only former Soviet bloc country that has had such an open conversation on this subject. Not in Poland, not in Ukraine, and not in Russia. So that's why I wanted to do this. And I was very worried that there were going to be demonstrations and that people would get very upset. That didn't happen.
This conversation indeed is taking place. I think it's still the beginning. And I hope it will continue. I hope it will continue even after the elections in a year and so on. So you explained very well how YIVO, in a way, is present and is taking part in this conversation. What would you see then as the main priorities for museums, archives, and other institutions of public history in Lithuania as concerns Jewish history?
There's only one thing. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Whatever the truth is, tell it. And of course, telling the truth is not easy, because if you lack resources with which to know, to discover, to find out the facts, you can't construct a history, a proper history. And unfortunately, too much of the history that has been handed down from generation to generation in many of the countries of Eastern Europe does not come from reliable, scientifically researched facts. And so part of what I hope to do is to help stimulate people to do precisely that. Find out. I had a discussion some years ago with a very highly placed individual in the Lithuanian government. She had come to YIVO to visit, and she said to me, it is high time for the Lithuanians to stop hiding their guilt from themselves. I thought this was a remarkable statement. And I hope that what YIVO can do in its work in Lithuania is to help that process.
Dr. Jonathan Brent, thank you very much. It has been a privilege talking to you.
Thank you.